All right, so picking up where we left off. Oh, and thank you all for indulging me. I was trying to move a little bit more swiftly here. We left off discussing how there's an expectation of artists within hip hop to be a bit more socially responsible. This is why, for example, Kanye West is being viewed in a way that he has been from the hip hop community because it's like, dude, what the fuck are you doing exactly? But even in the music itself, most of that is just with Kanye's public presentation. But even within the music itself, this is a huge expectation that you give something that reflects the overall black experience. Keep in mind, Shandell, as you listen to Biggie Smalls, that experience ain't always got to be something that's like black power. And speaking of, um, for lack of a better term, progressive steps towards black righteousness, if you will. But just to describe the black experience as honestly as possible, while also holding the black people accountable for improving that experience. So there were many things that were like, give me 1 second. I have a student that is asking to be let in. I apologize, class, for the brief interruption. So yeah, so within rap music, I apologize. The music itself, people were free to curse and joke. So I think Ms. Simons had mentioned earlier, for example, in one of our earlier classes, oh my God, you're using profanity in class. This is a hip hop class. Within hip hop, the cultural norms are a bit different. So although using profanity absolutely may go against the cultural norms of mainstream American culture, never something I would do within a formal meeting, in a job interview, and the like. But within hip hop spaces, and this is one of those, there's a lot more freedom for people to speak authentically. Because you know what many clergymen and professors and scientists do in their informal discussions? We curse and tell sometimes inappropriate jokes. Not to offend or belittle, that's a whole different conversation. That's never accepted almost in any space. But again, we talked about what's inappropriate or appropriate within a culture is one of the ways we define our values and norms within a culture. And one of the things that's always brought to mind is that who said this was inappropriate? More times than not, it was some slave master of the that was part of the ruling class that lived 400-500 years ago. That when we talk about American values, it's really important to understand that in many ways it's the values of that group, not poor white people, not of women, not of Jewish whites that may have lived in America at that time, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant wealthy males. That's who defined American culture and who continue to define American culture. So when I asked you, Shandell, who decided that rap music should be the most popular medium, it was mainly the bashing of rich white males that continue to dominate all aspects of American culture. We're not making a value judgment in saying that. That's a social fact. And the idea that people won't incorporate their own philosophies and baggage, if you will, into the wider culture, just as patently ridiculous. Rap music also gave artists space to challenge Western musical tradition. As I said before, opera and other European models, it's expected that the performer is up there in isolation. Afterwards, you give him or her their proper respect. Within almost every form of Black music, people are talking and interacting through the whole song. This is whether you're talking about, your church music on Sunday and the respected elder who is singing off key, word for word, louder than the choir right next to you. This is true again when you go to a hip hop show where, oftentimes the MC on stage will hold the mic to the crowd with the expectation, Chandel, that you finish the lyrics. And there's an expectation, and there's shame amongst the crowd if you can't do it. So if Biggie, when I asked you, what Juicy was about last week, Chandel, if you're at if you were at a rap show in 1994 and Biggie was rocking, it would be like he probably would stop rapping for part of the song and hold the mic to the crowd and let them finish. I'll see if I can dig up some YouTube examples of this as we go forward. In fact, why wait? Let me see if I can find anything right now. Bear with me, as you cannot see my screen fully right now. All right, I pulled up a video. I will share it a little bit later as time allows to kind of illustrate how this works in reality. Although again, if you've never been to a rap show, most of you all have probably been to a club or a party, and the DJ again might silence the music for a second and let the crowd chime in. This is something that again is endemic of Black cultural expressions all across the world. Another really important aspect of it, right? We talked about before, American values. Let me go back very quickly. American values. The second one that you see here is individualism. This isn't always a bad thing. That in some cultures, you would be expected to marry the person that the family has deemed appropriate for you. In some cultures, if your family name is not good, it can limit your individual progress through society. In some cultures, so we talked about the Indian caste system, for example. If you were part of the lower caste, and again, some of this is changing in modern India, but if you were part of the lower caste, your individual efforts and talents made little difference or impact upon how your life would be determined. In America, the individualism allows you to sometimes overcome your collective experience. There's a lot to be celebrated in that. But sometimes I think that our individualism can create some problems for our society. So for example, where now each individual believe it is their individual right to wear or not wear a mask. No concern or little concern whatsoever of how your actions might affect another person here in this God-fearing country. Because that's what Jesus Christ was all about, right? Like looking out for other people. So how does you being unconcerned about, another person's health jive with that value system is totally beyond me. But I'm not a religious scholar. I'm gonna stay in my lane. But the point being, whether it's talking about something like, whether it's talking about an issue like healthcare, where getting sick, is something that all of us are going to experience. For many Americans, it's viewed that is that's for you and your individual family to deal with. Chandel, your healthcare is you and your individual family's problem, according to the traditional American cultural edict. In a collective society such as the United States, that can sometimes cause some problems. So Black music, and hip hop in particular, was very deliberate about capturing the collective experience. And again, I put that there in italics, Cameron. Collective, collective, collective. It's not enough, good for Dr. Muhammad. He is an individual professor and PhD. How does that benefit the rest of the collective community? To be content with my own individual success and feel like, okay, all of a sudden my work is done, is not something that is aligned with my cultural view of the world. My cultural view of the world is that it's about the group. That if my people not right, I can't be right. This ideology, quite frankly, was been common amongst almost every culture across the world. It's not unique to Black people. Asian cultures are very collectivist. It's not an accident that you got people in South Korea and China to be able to conform to the cultural expectation of wearing masks a lot sooner than an individualistic society like America. This doesn't make Americans bad people, well, for the most part. But you have to understand the culture. In a culture where individuals are accustomed to doing what they want to do in the name of freedom, it's going to be tough to get everybody to wear a mask. Like, it just, we would have to reverse many years of enculturation. Rap music also, again, was a cultural art form that allowed new and forbidden ideas that could be tested. Things that were talked about, that were deemed unacceptable within traditional music forms. Listen here, in rap music, it's believed that any and everything is fair game. Marvin Gaye and Elvis Presley like having sex and may have described things in ways that, in their off-stage comments, may describe things as lewd as like, Snoop Dogg or somebody like that. These ideas and things are new. Like, so one of the things that frustrates me to no end is that the unfortunate overuse of terms like bitch, hoe, and even the word nigga. That did not start with hip hop, man. Our parents, our grandparents, great-grandparents have been talking about this for generations. But in most mainstream sensibilities, it was viewed that these things were unacceptable. When we talk freely about something that's been historically illegal, such as smoking marijuana, you think that hip hop was the first generation that started smoking weed? Like, really? Louis Armstrong, the famous jazz trumpeter, is purported to have smoked weed every single day of his life. He didn't talk about that in his music because such a thing would have ended his career. But in rap music, any and everything is fair game. Now, you want to be careful not to offend other people, but your goal is not to protect other people in the name of like subverting the truth. So again, many taboo subjects that were deemed unacceptable, that we're not supposed to talk about in polite company. In rap music, it can be because, again, this is a cultural art form that defines itself in being distinct from some of the mainstream cultural edicts that have made Black people feel, inferior, that have treated, not just made us feel this way, that have treated us in inferior ways. The people that have created this culture then get to dictate how we behave within ours, get to label us a certain way if we don't practice this bastard culture more effectively. Nah, dog. Hip hop introduced a new way of viewing the world. As I talked about before, Kool Herc, Afrika Bambaataa, Grandmaster Flash. We have founding fathers in the American cultural experiment. We can go back and look very specifically at the ideas purported by Thomas Jefferson. Some of them as contradictory as they may have been, where you got slave masters talking about, liberation and freedom for white male property owners. But whatever the case, we can go back and very clearly identify their views on how they thought the country should be constructed. Many people have hijacked some of their views, but we can go back and see this for ourselves. And since they're no longer with us, it sometimes can lead to some strange interpretations. This isn't true of hip hop. So when I identify these values that you see here, these are not the values that have been documented and identified by Dr. Kareem Muhammad. These are not my values. These are the values of hip hop subculture. How do I know? Because these cats here that helped to create it in the late 1970s documented these things from the very beginning. If you love hip hop like I do, I would encourage you to do your own research on this. Let's look at these values in a little bit more detail. Collective individual. Again, it is important to understand hip hop still exists and was created in the United States. A United States of a very specific time and place. So individuality is very important. Like again, like we talked about last week, that being a biter, not being original, it's just one of the worst things you could possibly be in hip hop. Being unique is really, really, really important. This is why it is questionable how hip hop it is for every single rapper that's come out for the last 10 years to be called Lil something, Lil this, Lil this, Lil this. Grown ass man, but you're Lil this, Lil that. You can't think of an original name, dog? Like, really? That shit is whack, and that ain't part of the hip hop value system. Hip hop is aspirational, as you see there in the 4th bullet point, meaning that even though this is music and culture that came from inner city America, some of the most challenging neighborhoods and communities you can possibly imagine. Hip hop, Shendale, was born in the South Bronx. The South Bronx was a really, really impoverished community at this time. Nobody, wants to live in squalor and cluttered housing with rats and roaches and asbestos eating away your cells, through the walls. Nobody wants to live like that. So most people, again, everybody aspires to get out of that experience. However, you want to get out of that physical experience. It's always a working class perspective. So even when you're rich, even when Jay-Z and Nas become rich, they are expected to not view the world and to record art that's going to be conducive for rich people. It's supposed to be for poor and working class people. This is not my belief. This is not Kareem speaking. This is the culture. It is a working class and poor people's culture. It just is. We ain't trying to stay poor. But as I have been able to move up, the economic ladder, because even though I'm talking about artists here, please believe, or I spent a lot of time talking about artists, most people who subscribe to this value system are not rappers. I absolutely live by this value system here. I cannot rap to save my life. So it's not just a rap music culture. Irish people have many aspects of their culture. Celtic music is one aspect of their culture. It's not the only thing that defines the culture, nor is rap music the only thing that defines hip hop. But in this way, even again in becoming your dean and professor, and I hope that I never have to stress too much in worrying about finances ever again. I ain't far from rich, but I'm also a nice ways away from being poor. In spite of that, my worldview and perspective is always going to work from that framework. I'm always going to see myself and present myself in many ways as somebody that's connected to and tied to working class culture that I grew up under. No matter how rich I hope I'm able to become. Signifying is a really important one. I will come back to that in just a moment because it's a little bit more time consuming. Others, we talked about again. Rejection of mainstream standards of decent behavior. Mainstream sexist slave masters are gonna tell me that I shouldn't fucking curse? Fuck them dudes. Who the fuck are they to tell me what I'm supposed to do? These are the people whose value system I'm supposed to adopt? Really? No. Reappropriation of mainstream products. So again, like we talked about before, let's look at these cultural artifacts and make sure that you're doing this at home when you look at these slides yourself. Reappropriation of mainstream products. Adidas gym shoes were not made for inner city kids. Timberland boots were not made for inner city kids. Young Black people, Shindell, took these cultural relics and made them for our own. The vast majority of Timberland sales today, I'm sure, are from the hip hop community. Timberlands were like hiking boots. Ain't nobody in hip hop gonna be putting their boots on and going to nobody's mouth. The whole concept just sounds crazy on its face. From my culture perspective, where I'm probably gonna try and elbow you really hard in your forehead if you get anywhere near my Timbs. So reappropriation of mainstream products. This vinyl record was not made to be an instrument. Rap producers made it into one. There's great respect for the past. So again, even though you're living in 2020, when I mention people like Assata Shakur, when I mention people like George Jackson, when I mention people like Steve Biko, if you ain't got no intellectual curiosity to learn more about these individuals, it is very questionable whether or not you're part of hip hop culture. You might like rap music a little bit, which many people do. There are people who hate Black people passionately that like rap music. Within this value system, understanding and having respect for the past is really, really important. Last week, Shindell, you were supposed to be learning about the origins, the birthplace of hip hop. This is really important to know if you're part of this culture. Signifying very quickly, as I talked about, this exists within hip hop exists within a mainstream society and culture. So this requires and we see this amongst MCs, but everybody within hip hop. It kind of requires a wider knowledge of culture. Let's look at some examples. This image that you see here, right? So Camp Lo is a hip hop group from the Bronx, New York, and this is their debut album, Uptown Saturday Night. And I want to bring your attention here to the album cover. And most of you looking at this, no matter how old you are, have some cultural relevance for this image that makes it make more sense than a kid who's into hip hop but is growing up in Japan, a kid who's into hip hop but is growing up in Australia. You may have seen this image before. Hopefully, everybody in this class has seen at least one episode of Good Times. If not, step your game up, dog. But you'll note that in the concluding scene of Good Times, so this is featured as presented as one of J.J. Evans' paintings. It actually was a painting created by a gentleman by the name of Ernie Barnes, as much of the artwork on the show was. And even more than that, this was featured on this is the album cover for Marvin Gaye's album in the 1970s, I Want You. I think the album was actually different, but that's neither here nor there. But it was a Marvin Gaye album for sure, and this was the album cover. Even this is signifying. This is not a portrayal of the times that Marvin Gaye lived in. It's a throwback to the 1910s, the 1920s, where before there were nightclubs, there might be a sugar shack or something like this, like an old barn or something, where Black people would go and they would have parties in there. And in these spaces, right, again, you see how they dance and stuff. You can see some sensuality in the dances. The women's figures are drawn in very pronounced ways. This is giving you, again, a respect for a lived Black past And Marvin Gaye, in his own way, is saying that he's carrying on this tradition. That in the 1960s and 1970s, the places where people were gathered did not look like this, but he was trying to create that same energy and mood. Camp Lo doing the same thing here in the late 1990s. Signifying, let's go back to our definition. Double voice and meaning. So texts are related to their antecedent. So in listening to this album and seeing this album cover in the 1990s, it don't make as much sense. You don't get the full cultural appreciation if you don't know this image. This happens a lot in hip hop. Here's another album cover. Well, one of the things, again, I really encourage you to do, look at the album art that is chosen. That's not done by accident. Things Fall Apart, my favorite book in the world, goes by the same title. Do you think that these have any connections at all? They do. This imagery that you see here is obviously in the 1960s, right? And it just look familiar in 2020? It sure does to me. In the rap lyrics themselves, you see this most. So Das EFX, in their rap lyrics, they say, you best come clean like Ja Rule or Felix Unger. This again is double meaning. Das EFX is showing their full knowledge of the culture. You best come clean like Ja Rule or Felix Unger. Ja Rule is Ja Rule the Damager, a rapper from Brooklyn, New York, that had a song called, ironically, Come Clean. Felix Unger is a character from a fictional TV show called The Odd Couple, based in the 1970s. And if you're an old man like me, you'll know that Felix was noted for being like, so The Odd Couple, like it was two dudes, like divorcees, they had an apartment together. And one roommate was very, very, very messy. The other, Felix Unger, he was cleaning up all the time. He was OCD before there was even such a term. Ras Kass, he says he's dressed to kill like Bernard Goetz. Bernard Goetz, so again, like, so how you saw like the coward vigilante in Wisconsin that took the lives of innocent protesters a few weeks back. I'm sure you all know of like George Zimmerman's bitch made ass, who again took law into his own hands. This is not anything that's unique. Bernard Goetz did this in a subway in New York City in the 1980s, where after like a verbal altercation with some gentlemen on the train, Bernard Goetz took out his gun and started killing people. So Ras Kass says he's dressed to kill, which means he's dressed nicely, but he's dressed to kill like Bernard Goetz. You get it? You get it? This is what I talked about earlier. Like, that is a horribly inappropriate metaphor and totally politically incorrect, correct? No pun intended. Totally politically incorrect, right? Yes. Hip hop doesn't care. It's not trying to offend anybody, but it is, like, again, bringing your attention to an issue without getting overly political about it. He doesn't tell the audience who Bernard Goetz is. If you're really familiar and down with this culture, you already know that. But it's not just dealing with elements of Black culture that are important to Black people. Rap artists use the entire culture in such brilliant ways. Talib Kweli, they snitching like Donnie Brasco. Again, that's a film. Donnie Brasco starring Al Pacino and Johnny Depp. We're waiting for it. Johnny Depp played a snitch, an FBI informant. They snitching like Donnie Brasco. I'm counting like Monte Cristo. Why can't I talk today? I'm counting like Monte Cristo. So again, The Count of Monte Cristo is a famous novel. The Ghetto Full of Betrayal, like Iago and Othello. So you got to be familiar with some Shakespeare to even understand what he's saying here, man. So he's talking like, so he's not going to take time to explain that. If you're not well read, if you're not versed in, like, again, you can't just be versed in hood culture. If you're not versed in all aspects of American culture, a lot of these lyrics are going to be going straight over your head. And they are not going to take time to catch you up. As you do your own listening exercises, you're going to hear lyrics that you're not familiar with exactly what they're saying. The good news for you, in a way that did not exist when I was hearing some of these lyrics for the first time, is that there's this invention called Google, where you can learn almost anything that you want about any concept or term. So if you don't know who Yago and Othello are, there are avenues and vessels that allow you to learn. And knowing who Yago, and this doesn't mean that you can't appreciate the lyrics if you don't, but you get a lot more out of it if you do. In this way, right, rappers, like they were, like I talked about before, it's not passive music. You have to actively be listening. This is why I told you before, Shandell, that even though I've heard Ready to Die probably literally 1,000 times, like I'm not sure that's an exaggeration. I've listened to that album that much. However, even at this ripe old age, I hear it in new and different ways because I'm constantly hearing new stuff. As my culture perspective has gotten wider, there are things that I can hear in that song that I could not when I was 19, 20, 21 years old. When we begin on Thursday, we'll talk about white coaches and supporting institutions and how they help to, again, facilitate the enculturation into American culture of many different groups. Again, this lecture will be posted shortly on YouTube and remain there for you throughout the duration of the class. Please avail yourself to it. Take notes. And then let's schedule an office hour appointment where we can talk about these things in a little bit more detailed way individually. I thank you for your time. I hope you're starting on your first writing assignment. And if you have any other questions, I hope to hear from you soon. Peace to you and yours.